What if the greatest threat to American health was not hiding in a laboratory, not spreading through the air, not carried by some invisible virus from another continent, but sitting quietly on dinner tables across the country every single night? What if the very foods millions of people trust, crave, advertise to their children, and consume every day were slowly reshaping the human body from the inside out? And perhaps the most disturbing question of all, if this is true, why does almost nobody seem able to stop it? Every morning across the United States, the same ritual unfolds: a quick bowl of colorful cereal, a toaster pastry, flavored yogurt, sweetened coffee, orange juice from a carton, convenient, fast, familiar. Then lunch arrives: frozen meals, drive-through burgers, chips, soda, protein bars, processed sandwiches wrapped in plastic. And at night, exhausted families gather around meals designed not for nourishment, but for speed. Microwave dinners, fast food delivery, fried snacks, sugary desserts. By the time most Americans go to sleep, many have consumed hundreds of ingredients their great-grandparents would not even recognize as food. And yet, this lifestyle has become so normal, so deeply woven into modern life, that almost nobody stops to ask a terrifying possibility. What if the food itself is making the country sick? Not immediately, not dramatically, but slowly, quietly, relentlessly. Like poison administered in microscopic doses. Because something strange has happened to the human body in the modern era. Obesity rates have exploded. Type 2 diabetes has spread at historic speed. Heart disease remains the leading killer in America. Cancer diagnoses continue rising. Fatty liver disease now appears in children. Millions struggle with exhaustion, inflammation, brain fog, anxiety, and chronic pain. And despite astonishing advances in medicine, despite trillions spent on healthcare, despite more pharmaceuticals than any civilization in human history, Americans are becoming sicker, not healthier. That contradiction sits at the center of a growing scientific and cultural mystery. How can a country with some of the most advanced medical technology on Earth also suffer from one of the highest rates of chronic disease? Some researchers believe the answer may begin in the supermarket. Others believe it begins much earlier, in the factories where modern food is engineered. Because much of what people eat today is not technically traditional food at all. It belongs to a category scientists now call ultra-processed foods. And once you understand what that term truly means, it becomes difficult to look at the average grocery store the same way ever again. Ultra-processed foods are industrial formulations, not meals prepared from basic ingredients. Not food in the traditional human sense. These products are typically manufactured using refined substances extracted from real foods, combined with chemicals, preservatives, stabilizers, flavor enhancers, dyes, emulsifiers, and synthetic additives designed to maximize shelf life, convenience, and craving. They are built for modern commerce, not necessarily for human biology, and they are everywhere. Breakfast cereals marketed as healthy, sodas consumed by the billions, frozen pizzas, instant noodles, candy bars, chicken nuggets, energy drinks, fast food meals, packaged snacks, sweetened yogurt, flavored oatmeal, processed bread. Some studies estimate that more than 60% of the average American diet now comes from ultra-processed foods. Among children and teenagers, the number may be even higher. Think about that for a moment. For most of human history, people ate foods that spoiled quickly because they were real. Fresh vegetables, fruit, eggs, fish, meat, beans, grains, but modern processed foods can survive for weeks, sometimes months, without decaying. And the question scientists increasingly ask is not merely what these foods contain, but what happens to the human body when they replace nearly everything else. At first, the effects can seem invisible: a little weight gain, slight fatigue, poor sleep, more cravings, mood swings, low energy, nothing dramatic enough to trigger alarm. But inside the body, systems begin changing. Blood sugar spikes more aggressively, insulin levels rise, inflammation quietly increases, hormonal signals become distorted, the gut microbiome begins shifting, and one of the strangest aspects of all, many processed foods appear specifically designed to override the body's natural appetite controls. Scientists and food engineers sometimes refer to this as hyperpalatability, the perfect combination of sugar, fat, salt, texture, aroma, and crunch that pushes the brain into a reward cycle difficult to resist. In other words, modern food may not merely feed hunger. It may chemically manipulate desire itself. And this is where the mystery deepens, because millions of Americans sincerely try to eat less, yet continue overeating. They blame themselves: lack of discipline, lack of willpower, laziness. But what if the problem is larger than personal weakness? What if entire industries have learned how to exploit ancient survival mechanisms buried deep inside the human brain? Because the human nervous system evolved in a world where sugar and fat were rare and valuable. Our ancestors did not encounter unlimited soda refills. They did not eat artificially flavored snacks engineered by food scientists. They did not consume desserts every day. The brain evolved to reward calorie-dense foods because, in ancient environments, calories meant survival. But in the modern world, those survival instincts may be getting hacked, and the consequences now appear everywhere. Nearly every American family has been touched by chronic disease: heart attacks, high blood pressure, diabetes, obesity, stroke, cancer. For many people, these illnesses feel inevitable. Aging simply seems to equal decline. But some researchers argue that what Americans call normal aging may actually be the long-term biological consequences of a radically unnatural food environment. An environment humans were never designed to navigate. And perhaps nowhere is this more visible than in childhood. Children today are exposed to unprecedented levels of processed foods from the very beginning of life. Brightly colored cereals, sugary drinks, snack cakes, fast food toys, candy rewards. Entire marketing systems target developing brains before children are old enough to understand advertising itself. And over time, taste preferences begin changing. Whole foods can start tasting bland. Vegetables become boring. Water feels unsatisfying compared to soda. The brain adapts to intensity. More sweetness, more salt, more stimulation, until natural food no longer feels normal. Some experts worry that this shift may alter eating behavior for life. And still, another question lingers beneath the surface. If processed food is so harmful, why is it so difficult to escape? The answer may involve far more than individual choice. Because in many parts of America, unhealthy food is not only cheaper, it is more accessible. Fast food restaurants exist on nearly every major road. Convenience stores dominate lower-income neighborhoods. Processed snacks are heavily subsidized and aggressively marketed. Meanwhile, fresh whole foods often cost more, spoil faster, and require time to prepare. For exhausted families working long hours, convenience becomes survival. And modern food corporations understand this perfectly, which raises another uncomfortable possibility. What if the modern food system is not broken? What if it is functioning exactly as designed? A system optimized for profit, scale, addiction, and convenience, even if the long-term cost is human health. But perhaps the most unsettling part of this story is that the damage rarely arrives all at once. The human body is remarkably resilient. For years, sometimes decades, it absorbs abuse silently. Until one day something changes. The blood test comes back abnormal. The doctor mentions prediabetes, blood pressure rises, chest pain appears, energy disappears, and suddenly the invisible damage becomes visible. Yet even then, many people never suspect the true cause. Because the foods involved were never considered dangerous. They were normal, American, everyday products found in ordinary kitchens across the country. And maybe that is what makes this crisis so difficult to see. Human beings instinctively fear sudden threats, viruses, accidents, disasters. But slow destruction is harder to notice, especially when it is wrapped in comfort, convenience, nostalgia, advertising, and taste. Especially when it begins in childhood. Especially when almost everyone around you is consuming the same things. And still, three enormous questions remain unanswered. If ultra-processed foods are reshaping the body, what exactly are they doing to the brain itself? Why do some people feel trapped in endless cycles of craving and overeating, no matter how hard they try to stop? And perhaps most disturbing of all, if the modern food environment is fundamentally incompatible with human biology, was the human body ever truly designed to survive the modern American diet at all? There is a reason so many people say the hardest part of changing their diet is not giving up fast food, not giving up soda, not even giving up late-night snacks. It is giving up sugar. Because once scientists began studying the modern American diet more closely, they discovered something unsettling. Sugar does not behave inside the human brain like an ordinary ingredient. In many ways, it behaves like a drug, and the deeper researchers looked, the stranger the story became. At first glance, sugar seems harmless. Sweet, comforting, familiar. Birthday cakes, ice cream trucks, holiday desserts, childhood cereal commercials on Saturday mornings. Sugar is woven into American culture so deeply that most people rarely question it. But modern Americans are not simply eating small amounts of natural sugar the way humans once did. They are consuming industrial quantities every single day, and often without even realizing it. A typical bottle of soda can contain more sugar than the human body evolved to encounter in days, perhaps even weeks. Some flavored coffee drinks contain shocking amounts hidden beneath whipped cream and marketing words like energy, refresh, or comfort. But what makes the situation even more disturbing is this. Many of the sweetest foods in America do not even taste obviously sweet anymore. Sugar now hides almost everywhere. In ketchup, in pasta sauce, in salad dressing, in bread, in yogurt, in protein bars, in breakfast cereal, in flavored oatmeal, in peanut butter, even in foods advertised as healthy. For decades, food manufacturers quietly learned an important psychological truth. People crave sweetness, and when sweetness increases, sales often increase too. So products became sweeter year after year until entire populations slowly adapted to levels of sugar previous generations would have found overwhelming. The human tongue changed, the brain changed, expectations changed, and eventually many natural foods began tasting strangely bland by comparison. Fruit no longer felt sweet enough, water felt boring, vegetables became difficult to enjoy. The brain had adjusted to hyperstimulation. And this is where one of the most controversial questions in nutrition begins to emerge. Can sugar become addictive? Some scientists resist using that word. Others believe the evidence is becoming impossible to ignore. Because when researchers observe the brain under certain conditions, sugar activates reward pathways remarkably similar to addictive substances, especially dopamine systems. Dopamine is often misunderstood as the pleasure chemical, but in reality, dopamine is deeply connected to motivation, reward anticipation, craving, and reinforcement. It teaches the brain what to pursue again, and sugar triggers it powerfully, especially refined sugar combined with fat and processed texture. When a person eats highly sweetened food, the brain receives a rapid reward signal. For a brief moment, energy surges. Mood lifts, stress softens, pleasure appears, but then something else happens. Blood sugar rises rapidly, insulin follows, and shortly afterward, the crash begins. Fatigue, irritability, brain fog, hunger returning unnaturally fast, which often leads to another craving, another snack, another soda, another dessert. The cycle repeats. And over time, the brain may begin demanding stronger stimulation to achieve the same reward response. More sweetness, more processed food, more frequency. Some researchers compare this process to tolerance mechanisms seen in addiction. Not identical, but disturbingly similar. And perhaps the most frightening part is how early this process now begins. American children are exposed to extreme levels of sugar almost immediately. Brightly colored cereals shaped like cartoons, sports drinks marketed as healthy, juice boxes loaded with sugar, candy rewards in classrooms, desserts normalized after nearly every meal. Entire childhood experiences become emotionally linked to sweetness. Comfort equals sugar. Celebration equals sugar. Reward equals sugar. Even sadness becomes connected to sugar. Many adults do not realize how deeply this conditioning runs until they attempt to stop consuming processed sweets. Then the symptoms begin. Cravings, headaches, mood swings, fatigue, irritability. And once again, another question emerges. If sugar is merely harmless pleasure, why does the body react so aggressively when people remove it? But the damage may extend far beyond cravings alone. Because the modern sugar explosion appears closely connected to one of the fastest growing health disasters in American history. Type 2 diabetes. Once considered relatively rare among children, type 2 diabetes is now appearing at alarming rates in younger populations. The disease develops when the body gradually becomes resistant to insulin, the hormone responsible for regulating blood sugar. At first, the pancreas works harder and harder to compensate. But eventually, the system begins failing. Blood sugar remains elevated, and slowly damage spreads throughout the body. The eyes, the kidneys, the nerves, the heart, the blood vessels. Diabetes is not merely about high sugar. It is systemic biological stress, and many experts believe the modern food environment is accelerating it on a massive scale. Especially because sugar today rarely appears alone. It travels inside ultra-processed foods stripped of fiber, nutrients, and natural balance. The body absorbs it rapidly, faster than human metabolism evolved to handle. But even more disturbing is the psychological side of the equation. Many people consuming high amounts of sugar do not actually feel energized. They feel exhausted. They wake up tired, crash in the afternoon, need caffeine to function, need sugar for temporary relief. And beneath it all, the body remains trapped in unstable energy cycles, which may help explain another growing mystery in America. Why do so many people constantly feel hungry, even after eating enormous amounts of calories? The answer may involve how processed sugar interferes with satiety signaling. In natural environments, humans consumed foods containing fiber, water, protein, and nutrients that helped regulate appetite. But refined sugar delivers intense calories with astonishing speed. The body receives energy, but often not satisfaction, which means the brain keeps searching. Keep eating, keep craving, keep consuming. And modern food corporations understand this dynamic extremely well. Some scientists and former industry insiders describe modern processed food design almost like behavioral engineering. The goal is not simply feeding people. The goal is maximizing repeat consumption, creating foods difficult to stop eating, foods that trigger reward without fullness, foods that encourage just one more bite. Because one additional bite multiplied across millions of customers becomes billions of dollars. And nowhere is this more visible than in the American beverage industry. Liquid sugar may be among the most aggressive forms of all. Soda, sweet tea, energy drinks, flavored coffees, sports drinks. Unlike solid food, sugary beverages often bypass many natural satiety signals. People can consume massive amounts of sugar without ever feeling truly full. Meanwhile, the liver becomes overwhelmed processing continuous fructose exposure. Some researchers now compare aspects of chronic sugar overload to alcohol metabolism inside the liver, which helps explain why non-alcoholic fatty liver disease has exploded across America, even among children. Children. That single fact changes the emotional weight of this entire story. Because for most of human history, childhood obesity and metabolic disease on this scale simply did not exist. Something fundamentally changed in the modern environment. And yet, children today are surrounded by aggressive food marketing at nearly every moment. Television commercials, apps, school vending machines, bright packaging, influencers, fast food mascots. The average child may encounter thousands of food advertisements every year before fully understanding persuasion itself. And many of those advertisements target the brain's reward circuitry directly. Excitement, fun, belonging, comfort, all linked to sugar, all linked to processed food, which raises another deeply uncomfortable question. If adults struggle to resist these products, what chance does a developing child brain really have? Especially when many parents themselves grew up inside the exact same food culture, a culture where sweetness became normalized, where oversized sodas became ordinary, where dessert stopped being occasional and became daily life. And beneath all of this, the larger mystery continues expanding. Because sugar may not simply affect weight, researchers are now exploring connections between excessive sugar consumption and inflammation, mood disorders, cognitive decline, cardiovascular disease, and even certain cancers. The body appears interconnected in ways modern society still barely understands, which means the true cost of chronic sugar overload may be far larger than anyone imagined. And still, most Americans continue consuming it from sunrise until midnight, not because they are weak, not because they are unintelligent, but because they were born into an environment engineered around craving, an environment where sugar became invisible, normal, expected, almost unavoidable, and perhaps the darkest possibility of all is that this process may begin so early in life that many people never experience what a natural relationship with food was supposed to feel like in the first place. Because if the modern brain can be conditioned by processed sweetness from childhood, if dopamine pathways can be trained before adulthood, if corporations understand exactly how to shape lifelong cravings, then one terrifying possibility begins to emerge from the shadows. Maybe an entire generation is not simply choosing sugar. Maybe they are being programmed to need it from the very beginning. There was a time in American history when fast food felt like a miracle. Hot meals in minutes, cheap prices, no dishes, no waiting, no cooking after exhausting workdays. For a rapidly modernizing country obsessed with speed, efficiency, and convenience, fast food seemed like the perfect invention. And at first, almost nobody suspected the long-term consequences. Families loved it, children adored it, corporations expanded it, television glorified it. Bright signs appeared beside highways across the country like glowing symbols of modern life itself. Burgers, fries, milkshakes, fried chicken, pizza, tacos, fast, predictable, addictive. But hidden beneath the smell of frying oil and fresh bread, something much larger was quietly taking shape. Because fast food was never just about feeding people quickly. It represented a completely new relationship between human beings and food. For most of history, meals required effort. People cooked, prepared ingredients, sat together, ate slowly. Food was connected to time. But fast food disconnected eating from almost everything human beings had historically associated with nourishment. Now meals could happen inside cars, between meetings, while driving, while scrolling phones, while rushing through life. Eating became automatic. And as America accelerated, the fast food industry accelerated with it. Longer work hours, more commuting, more stress, less time. Convenience stopped feeling optional. It became survival. And few industries understood this transformation better than fast food corporations. They did not merely adapt to modern American life. In many ways, they helped shape it. But something even more powerful was happening behind the scenes. Scientists working within food industries began studying an unusual question. What makes people unable to stop eating? Not satisfied, not nourished, unable to stop. And eventually, researchers discovered something called the bliss point, the precise balance of sugar, salt, and fat that maximizes pleasure inside the human brain. Too little salt feels bland, too much becomes unpleasant, too little sweetness feels boring, too much becomes overwhelming. But somewhere in the middle exists a neurological sweet spot, a perfect sensory equation capable of triggering powerful reward responses. Fast food companies spent years refining this formula. Crispy textures, melting cheese, sweet sauces, salty fries, soft bread, savory meat, every element carefully engineered to stimulate craving, not fullness, craving. And once these ingredients combine, something extraordinary happens inside the brain. Sugar activates dopamine, fat increases reward perception, salt intensifies flavor signaling. Together, they create what many scientists now call hyperpalatability. Food so stimulating that normal appetite regulation begins breaking down. The brain stops asking, "Am I hungry?" and starts asking something far more dangerous. Why stop now? This may explain why so many people continue eating fast food even when physically full. The reward system overrides satiety. One more fry, one more bite, one more soda. And the industry understands this psychology with astonishing precision. Portions expanded year after year because larger portions increased dopamine stimulation and customer satisfaction. Drinks became enormous. Fries became supersized. Desserts became entire meals themselves. The human stomach remained the same size. But the modern food environment changed completely. And perhaps the strangest part is that many fast food meals deliver huge amounts of calories while providing surprisingly little actual nourishment. This creates a biological paradox. The body receives excess energy but insufficient nutrients, meaning people can become simultaneously overfed and undernourished. Calories rise, hunger remains, cravings continue. The body keeps searching for what it still lacks, which may help explain another disturbing trend in America. Many people eat constantly, yet feel exhausted all the time, because fast food often creates rapid blood sugar spikes followed by crashes, temporary energy followed by fatigue. And in response, people seek more stimulation, more caffeine, more sugar, more fast food. The cycle feeds itself. Meanwhile, the body absorbs staggering amounts of sodium, refined carbohydrates, industrial oils, and inflammatory compounds, and slowly, damage accumulates. High blood pressure, insulin resistance, chronic inflammation, arterial damage, weight gain. But because these effects develop gradually over years, the connection often feels invisible. No single burger causes heart disease. No single soda causes diabetes. No single meal causes obesity. Instead, the destruction unfolds quietly through repetition, day after day, meal after meal, year after year. And perhaps that is what makes fast food uniquely dangerous. It does not feel dangerous, it feels comforting, predictable, familiar, especially during stress. Researchers have noticed something fascinating about emotional eating. When humans feel anxious, lonely, exhausted, or overwhelmed, the brain naturally seeks rapid reward and comfort. Fast food delivers both immediately: warmth, salt, sugar, fat, temporary emotional relief. Which means many people are not merely eating for hunger, they are self-soothing through chemistry. After difficult workdays, after arguments, after heartbreak, after stress, the meal becomes emotional anesthesia, and modern life provides endless stress. This may explain why fast food consumption often rises during periods of national anxiety, economic instability, and exhaustion. The more overwhelmed society becomes, the more attractive instant comfort feels. But another mystery begins emerging beneath the surface. Why do fast food cravings sometimes feel almost automatic? Why do certain smells trigger sudden desire even without physical hunger? The answer may involve conditioning. Over years, the brain builds powerful associations: golden arches beside highways, the smell of fries, commercial jingles, bright packaging. The nervous system learns to anticipate dopamine before the food even arrives, which means cravings can begin long before the first bite. In some cases, simply seeing advertisements may activate reward pathways, and modern Americans are exposed to these triggers constantly. Billboards, television, apps, social media, sports sponsorships. Fast food branding saturates daily life so completely that resisting temptation becomes psychologically exhausting, especially for children. Children may be the most vulnerable targets of all. Bright mascots, toy promotions, colorful desserts, cartoon meals. Entire generations grow up emotionally bonded to fast food before they can understand nutrition itself. For many Americans, fast food is not just food. It is memory. Birthday parties, road trips, family outings, after-school treats. The emotional wiring begins early, and once those neural pathways form, changing behavior later becomes extraordinarily difficult. Which raises another troubling possibility. What if fast food companies are not competing merely for customers, but for neurological territory inside the developing human brain? Because once cravings become habitual, consumption becomes predictable, and predictable consumption becomes enormously profitable. The fast food industry now generates hundreds of billions of dollars. Entire corporate empires built on repeat eating behavior, repeat cravings, repeat stimulation. And yet, despite overwhelming awareness about obesity and chronic disease, consumption continues rising. Why? Because information alone rarely defeats biology, especially when biology itself is being manipulated. Many people know fast food is unhealthy, but knowledge often loses against exhaustion, stress, convenience, cost, and neurochemical reward. That is the true power of hyperpalatable food. It bypasses rational thinking. It speaks directly to ancient survival systems buried deep inside the nervous system. Systems designed for a completely different world, a world where calories were scarce, a world where salt and fat meant survival, a world where humans never encountered unlimited engineered stimulation. And now those ancient instincts face industrial food science. One side evolved over hundreds of thousands of years. The other employs laboratories, behavioral research, billion-dollar marketing campaigns, and neurological optimization. The human brain never stood much chance. Meanwhile, obesity rates continue climbing. Cardiovascular disease remains one of America's leading killers. And researchers increasingly suspect that ultra-processed fast food may influence not only weight, but inflammation, hormones, gut bacteria, mood, and even long-term cognitive health. The body appears to pay a price for constant artificial stimulation. But perhaps the greatest illusion of all is the belief that fast food saves time, because the hours gained through convenience may later return as years spent battling chronic disease. Doctor appointments, medication, fatigue, pain, surgery, metabolic dysfunction. The hidden bill arrives slowly, and by the time many people recognize it, the biological damage is already deeply embedded. Yet the industry continues growing. Faster delivery, bigger portions, more addictive flavors, more convenience. As if modern civilization itself is racing towards something it no longer fully controls. And somewhere beneath the glowing restaurant signs, the endless commercials, and the comforting smell of fried food drifting across American highways, another realization quietly begins to emerge. Fast food is not simply selling meals. it may be selling engineered compulsion itself. Because once scientists learned how to combine salt, sugar, fat, texture, aroma, speed, and emotional conditioning into one seamless experience, the product stopped behaving like ordinary food and started behaving much more like addiction. For decades, Americans were told a simple story about fat. Butter was dangerous, animal fat was the enemy, traditional cooking oils were outdated. The future, people were told, belonged to modern vegetable oils, cleaner, lighter, heart healthy, and few people questioned it. After all, the message came from advertisements, food companies, public campaigns, magazines, television, and even parts of the medical establishment itself. So quietly, almost invisibly, the American kitchen began to change. Lard disappeared, tallow faded away, traditional fats slowly retreated into the background. In their place came industrial seed oils, soybean oil, corn oil, canola oil, cottonseed oil, sunflower oil, mass-produced oils extracted through industrial processing on a scale previous generations could never have imagined. And over time, these oils spread into almost every corner of the American diet. Fast food fryers, packaged snacks, frozen meals, restaurant kitchens, salad dressings, processed sauces. Today, many Americans consume seed oils daily without even realizing it. And that fact sits at the center of one of the most controversial debates in modern nutrition. Because some scientists believe these oils are mostly harmless when consumed appropriately. Others believe they may be deeply connected to the explosion of chronic disease across the modern world. And the deeper researchers investigate, the more complicated the story becomes. To understand why, it helps to go back to the years following the Second World War. America entered a new industrial age. Food production scaled rapidly, agricultural technology exploded, factories transformed the national diet, soybeans and corn became massively profitable crops, heavily supported by industrial agriculture. And eventually, food manufacturers discovered they could extract enormous quantities of inexpensive oil from them. Cheap oils meant cheap processed foods, cheap frying, cheap mass production. An economic revolution quietly entered the food system, and because these oils were inexpensive and versatile, they spread everywhere with astonishing speed. But something else changed alongside them: the balance of fatty acids inside the human diet itself, particularly omega-6 fatty acids. Now, omega-6 fats are not inherently evil. The human body actually needs them in certain amounts. The problem, according to many researchers, may be quantity and imbalance. Historically, humans consumed a more balanced ratio of omega-3 and omega-6 fats, but modern industrial diets shifted that balance dramatically. Some estimates suggest modern Americans now consume extraordinarily high levels of omega-6 oils compared to ancestral diets. And this matters because omega-6 fats are connected to inflammatory pathways inside the body. Inflammation itself is not automatically bad. In fact, acute inflammation is essential for survival. It helps fight infection, repair injury, protect tissue. But chronic inflammation is different. Chronic inflammation is the body remaining in a low-grade defensive state for years, quietly, constantly, like a fire smoldering beneath the surface without ever fully extinguishing. And many scientists now believe chronic inflammation may play a central role in some of the most devastating diseases in modern America. Heart disease, type 2 diabetes, obesity, Alzheimer's disease, arthritis, certain cancers, which raises an unsettling possibility. What if modern food is not simply overfeeding the body, but keeping it trapped in a constant state of biological stress? Because unlike dramatic illness, chronic inflammation often feels invisible at first. There is no immediate collapse, no obvious warning sign. Instead, subtle symptoms slowly emerge: fatigue, brain fog, joint pain, digestive problems, low energy, poor recovery, weight gain. Symptoms so common many people assume they are simply normal parts of aging. But what if they are not normal at all? What if the body is quietly reacting to a food environment it was never designed to handle? And nowhere does this debate become more intense than around fried food. French fries, fried chicken, fast food meals, processed snacks. Many of these foods are cooked in large quantities of industrial seed oils, heated repeatedly at high temperatures. Under these conditions, oils can undergo chemical changes, oxidation, break down compounds, reactive molecules. Some researchers worry these substances may contribute to oxidative stress and inflammation inside the body, especially when consumed constantly over years. But the controversy surrounding seed oils has become so heated, partly because nutrition science itself is extraordinarily difficult. Human diets are complex. People eat thousands of foods. Lifestyle factors overlap constantly. Exercise, stress, genetics, smoking, alcohol. Untangling cause and effect becomes incredibly challenging, which means some experts caution against oversimplifying the issue. Not all studies reach the same conclusions. Not all seed oils behave identically, and context matters enormously. But even among scientists who disagree on specifics, many share one concern. The modern industrial diet as a whole appears profoundly unnatural compared to the conditions under which the human body evolved, especially because seed oils rarely appear alone. They are usually embedded inside ultra-processed foods already loaded with sugar, refined carbohydrates, additives, and excess calories. And together, these ingredients may create a metabolic environment the body struggles to regulate. Meanwhile, another question continues haunting modern health research. Why are chronic diseases increasing so dramatically despite advances in medicine? Why do younger people now experience conditions once associated primarily with old age? Why do so many Americans feel physically unwell, even when laboratory results appear mostly normal? Some scientists suspect chronic inflammation may be one missing piece of the puzzle, not as a single cause, but as a hidden biological background process influencing countless systems simultaneously. The immune system, hormones, blood vessels, brain chemistry, metabolism. A body constantly inflamed may gradually lose its ability to regulate itself efficiently. And yet inflammation is notoriously difficult for people to perceive directly. Unlike pain from a broken bone or infection, low-grade inflammation often operates silently for years, which makes modern food uniquely dangerous because the damage accumulates invisibly, meal by meal, oil by oil, year by year. And once again, the food industry understood something crucial long before most consumers did. Fat improves flavor, especially when combined with salt and sugar. Fried foods trigger intense sensory satisfaction, crunch, warmth, richness, pleasure. The brain responds instantly, and modern seed oils made large-scale frying cheap enough to dominate entire industries. Fast food expansion would have looked very different without them. Cheap fried calories helped reshape the American diet. But perhaps even more important, they reshaped expectations. People became accustomed to highly stimulating textures and flavors available everywhere at all times, which may help explain why many whole foods now taste comparatively dull to modern palates. Because once the nervous system adapts to hyperpalatable food, normal food can feel emotionally unsatisfying. And this may connect back to one of the deepest mysteries in the entire modern health crisis. Why do so many people genuinely struggle to change their eating habits even when they understand the risks? The answer may not simply involve discipline. It may involve biology, conditioning, economics, convenience, emotional reward, and neurochemistry all interacting at once, especially when processed food surrounds people every moment of daily life. At restaurants, at schools, at airports, at gas stations, at sporting events, inside nearly every supermarket aisle. Avoiding ultra-processed industrial food increasingly requires conscious effort. And conscious effort becomes difficult in exhausted societies, especially societies living under chronic stress. Because stressed humans instinctively seek fast calories and comfort, the exact products modern food systems mass produce most efficiently. And beneath all of this, another disturbing realization slowly begins to emerge. The modern health crisis may not come from one ingredient alone, not sugar alone, not seed oils alone, not fast food alone, but from the combined effect of thousands of small biological assaults repeated every day for decades. Tiny disruptions accumulating until the body finally begins breaking down, which may explain why so many illnesses in modern America develop gradually rather than suddenly. The body absorbs punishment silently until one day it no longer can. And perhaps the most dangerous aspect of chronic inflammation is precisely that silence. No alarms, no dramatic symptoms, no immediate fear, just slow internal wear spreading quietly through blood vessels, organs, hormones, and tissues while life continues normally on the surface. Which means millions of people may already be living inside inflammatory states they cannot fully feel yet, still eating the same foods, still trusting the same systems, still assuming the body will somehow endure indefinitely, without realizing that some of the greatest damage in human health does not happen explosively. It happens gradually, quietly, almost invisibly. Because the terrifying thing about chronic inflammation is that you barely notice it happening until it is far too late. At first, America barely noticed it happening. The change was gradual: a little more weight every decade, a slightly larger waistline, bigger clothing sizes in stores, heavier children in classrooms. Nothing dramatic enough to feel like a national emergency. Until suddenly, it was everywhere. Airline seats became tighter, hospital equipment required redesigning, childhood obesity rates exploded, type 2 diabetes appeared in younger and younger patients, and an uncomfortable realization slowly emerged. The United States was no longer simply dealing with overweight individuals. It was facing one of the largest obesity epidemics in human history. Today, millions of Americans live inside bodies carrying far more weight than human biology was ever designed to manage. And yet the story most people were told about obesity remains strangely simple. Eat less, move more, show more discipline. But the deeper scientists studied modern obesity, the more they realized something disturbing. The human body is not merely failing because people suddenly became lazy. Something in the environment itself appears to be overwhelming ancient biological systems. Because hunger is not controlled by willpower alone, it is controlled by hormones, neurotransmitters, reward pathways, stress chemistry, sleep quality, food engineering. And modern life may be disrupting all of them simultaneously. For most of human evolution, calories were scarce. The body evolved sophisticated survival mechanisms to prevent starvation. When humans found calorie-dense foods, the brain rewarded them intensely because survival depended on it. But the modern food environment changed the rules completely. Now calories are everywhere: cheap, constant, engineered, delivered instantly. And perhaps most importantly, modern processed calories interact with the brain differently than traditional foods ever did, especially because many ultra-processed foods bypass natural satiety systems. In nature, fullness usually arrives gradually. Fiber slows digestion. Protein regulates appetite. Whole foods require chewing and time. But modern processed foods are often soft, hyperpalatable, rapidly absorbed, and extraordinarily calorie-dense. The body receives enormous energy before the brain fully recognizes what happened, which may help explain why so many people feel hungry again shortly after eating. The biological feedback system becomes distorted. And then there is portion size, one of the most overlooked transformations in modern America. Decades ago, many restaurant portions were dramatically smaller. Sodas came in modest cups. French fries were side items. Desserts were occasional treats. But over time, something changed. Meals became enormous. Not slightly larger, massively larger. Supersized drinks, double burgers, bottomless refills, family-sized snacks marketed for individual consumption. The psychology behind this was powerful. People associate larger portions with better value. More food feels like winning, and food corporations understood this perfectly, because larger portions do not merely increase sales. They retrain the human brain. Over time, the nervous system recalibrates what normal eating looks like. A meal that once would have fed multiple people begins feeling ordinary for one person. Meanwhile, the stomach adapts. Appetite signals change, and gradually, consuming excessive calories starts feeling psychologically normal, especially when almost everyone around you is eating similarly. But obesity is not only about food quantity, it is also deeply connected to emotion. Many people do not eat simply because they are hungry. They eat because they are stressed, lonely, anxious, exhausted, depressed, overwhelmed. And modern American life produces enormous emotional pressure: long work hours, financial stress, social isolation, digital overload, sleep deprivation. Under stress, the body releases cortisol and seeks fast reward. The brain wants comfort, and ultra-processed food delivers immediate dopamine relief: sugar, salt, fat, warmth, pleasure. For a brief moment, emotional pain softens, which means emotional eating is not weakness. It is often biological self-medication, the body trying to regulate unbearable stress through chemistry. But the relief is temporary. Soon the crash returns, and so does the craving. This cycle becomes even more dangerous inside environments known as food deserts, areas where access to affordable, healthy food is extremely limited. In many lower-income neighborhoods across America, fast food restaurants and convenience stores vastly outnumber grocery stores selling fresh produce. Cheap processed calories become the easiest option available, sometimes the only realistic option. A family working multiple jobs may not have time, transportation, money, or energy to prepare fresh meals daily. Fast food becomes practical survival. And once again, the modern health crisis reveals itself as something much larger than individual choice. Because obesity rates do not spread randomly, they often follow economic pressure, stress, inequality, and environmental design. The system itself shapes behavior. Meanwhile, physical activity quietly disappeared from daily life. For most of history, human beings moved constantly, walking, lifting, working outdoors, carrying water, farming, building. Movement was unavoidable. But modern America engineered movement out of existence. Cars replaced walking. Screens replaced outdoor activity. Office jobs replaced physical labor. Entertainment became sedentary. Many people now spend most waking hours sitting, at desks, in cars, on couches, in front of phones. And while inactivity alone does not fully explain obesity, it creates another layer of metabolic stress. Muscles burn less energy, insulin sensitivity declines, circulation slows, energy expenditure drops. The human body evolved for motion. Modern life increasingly demands stillness. And perhaps the most tragic part is how obesity affects the mind itself. People living with obesity often experience shame, judgment, ridicule, and self-hatred. Society frames the condition as moral failure. But emerging science obesity is far more biologically complex than simple overeating. Hormones like leptin and ghrelin influence hunger and satiety. Sleep deprivation increases cravings. Stress alters metabolism. Ultra-processed food changes reward signaling. The body actively fights to maintain weight once obesity develops, which is why long-term weight loss becomes extraordinarily difficult for many people. The brain interprets calorie reduction as threat. Hunger intensifies. Metabolism slows. Cravings increase. And this creates one of the cruelest cycles in modern health. People blame themselves for losing a battle against biological systems being manipulated from multiple directions at once. Meanwhile, the medical consequences continue growing. Obesity dramatically increases the risk of heart disease. The heart must pump harder through larger bodies. Blood pressure rises. Inflammation spreads. Arteries suffer damage. Type 2 diabetes becomes more likely as insulin resistance worsens. Certain cancers also appear more frequently in obesity-related inflammatory environments. Researchers now connect obesity to increased risks for cancers involving the breast, colon, pancreas, liver, and more. And still, millions of Americans continue gaining weight despite constant awareness campaigns, which suggests information alone cannot solve the problem. Because the environment producing obesity remains everywhere. Hyperpalatable food, gigantic portions, chronic stress, economic pressure, sedentary lifestyles, aggressive marketing. The human nervous system is being overwhelmed from every direction simultaneously. And perhaps this is why the obesity epidemic feels so different from older forms of disease. It is not caused by one virus, one bacterium, one accident. It emerges from countless small pressures acting together across years. An entire civilization drifting away from biological conditions human beings evolved to survive within. And now another disturbing question begins to emerge. If obesity is not simply excess weight, what exactly is it? Because many scientists increasingly describe obesity not merely as fat accumulation, but as metabolic dysfunction, a body struggling to regulate energy properly. Hormones disrupted, inflammation elevated, appetite signaling distorted, cells overwhelmed. In other words, obesity may be less about appearance and more about systems failure, the visible symptom of something deeper happening beneath the surface. And perhaps that is why the crisis continues accelerating despite endless diets, fitness trends, and weight loss products, because modern obesity may not be the result of isolated bad decisions. It may be the biological response of the human body trapped inside an environment it was never designed to endure. An environment where hunger signals are manipulated, movement disappears, stress never ends. And ultra-processed calories remain available every hour of every day, which leads to a realization far darker than most people want to admit. Obesity is not simply about gaining weight. It may be one of the clearest warning signs that the entire human metabolic system is beginning to break down. For a long time, scientists treated the brain and the body as if they were separate worlds. Mental health belonged to psychology, food belonged to nutrition, the stomach belonged to digestion, each system studied independently. But in recent years, a growing number of researchers have begun questioning whether that division was deeply mistaken. Because something strange keeps appearing in the data. The same modern diet connected to obesity, diabetes, and heart disease also appears increasingly linked to anxiety, depression, brain fog, mood instability, and cognitive dysfunction. And the deeper scientists investigate, the more disturbing the connection becomes. What if modern processed food is not only changing the human body, but altering the human mind itself? Millions of Americans wake up every day feeling mentally exhausted, not just physically tired, mentally heavy, difficulty concentrating, poor memory, lack of motivation, constant distraction, emotional instability. Many describe the sensation as brain fog, a strange mental haze where thoughts feel slower, focus becomes fragile, and even simple tasks require unusual effort. At first glance, these symptoms seem psychological: stress, burnout, too much screen time, and certainly those factors matter. But researchers are increasingly asking another question. What role does food play in all of this? Because the brain consumes enormous amounts of energy. Although it represents only a small percentage of total body weight, the brain uses extraordinary metabolic resources, which means the quality of fuel entering the body may directly influence cognitive function. And modern processed food delivers fuel unlike anything the human nervous system evolved alongside. Rapid sugar spikes, industrial oils, artificial additives, flavor enhancers, chemical preservatives, a constant stream of hyper-processed stimulation entering the bloodstream every day. Especially sugar. When blood sugar rises rapidly, the brain initially experiences increased stimulation and reward signaling. But after the spike often comes instability, energy crashes, irritability, mental fatigue, difficulty focusing. Over time, repeated glucose instability may affect mood regulation, stress hormones, and inflammation inside the nervous system itself. Some researchers now believe chronic blood sugar dysregulation may contribute to depression and anxiety symptoms in certain individuals. And once again, inflammation enters the story, because the brain is not isolated from the immune system. Chronic inflammation throughout the body may influence neurotransmitters, hormone balance, and neural communication, which raises an unsettling possibility. What if some emotional suffering is not purely psychological, but partially metabolic? Not imaginary, not weakness, but biological dysfunction unfolding inside the brain itself. And then there are seed oils and ultra-processed fats. While scientific debate continues around their exact effects, some researchers suspect that excessive inflammatory diets may impact cognitive health over time. The brain is composed largely of fat-based structures, cell membranes, neural communication systems, hormonal signaling, which means dietary fats may influence how efficiently the brain functions, especially when combined with poor sleep, stress, inactivity, and ultra-processed food consumption. But perhaps the most controversial area involves food additives themselves: artificial colorings, flavor enhancers, stabilizers, preservatives. Some scientists have explored whether certain additives may influence behavior and attention in sensitive individuals, especially children. The evidence remains debated, but concerns continue growing, particularly around behavioral symptoms resembling attention disorders. Restlessness, impulsivity, difficulty focusing. Modern children are growing up in environments flooded with processed stimulation from every direction: fast-moving screens, constant notifications, sugary foods, artificial flavor intensity. And some experts wonder whether the modern nervous system is becoming chronically overstimulated before it fully develops, especially because the brain evolved under radically different conditions: natural light cycles, whole foods, physical movement, silence, periods of boredom. Modern life offers the opposite: constant stimulation without recovery. And processed food may amplify this instability even further. Meanwhile, anxiety and depression continue rising across America, particularly among younger generations. Many explanations exist: social media, economic pressure, loneliness, sleep deprivation, information overload. But increasingly, researchers are beginning to ask whether nutrition must also be part of the conversation. because the brain does not manufacture neurotransmitters from nothing. It builds them from biological resources, amino acids, vitamins, minerals, fatty acids. And when diets become dominated by ultra-processed foods, stripped of nutritional density, the nervous system may struggle to function optimally, especially over years. But perhaps the most fascinating discovery of all lies not inside the brain, but inside the gut. Because scientists now believe the digestive system may be communicating with the brain constantly through what is known as the gut-brain axis, a vast communication network involving nerves, hormones, immune signals, and trillions of microorganisms living inside the intestines. The microbiome, an entire hidden ecosystem living within the human body. And these microbes may influence far more than digestion. Some help produce neurotransmitter-related compounds. Some influence inflammation. Some affect immune activity. Some may even alter mood and behavior, which means the food humans eat may not simply feed the body. It also feeds the microscopic organisms living inside it. And this is where the story becomes almost unbelievable. Different microbes thrive on different foods. Some flourish on fiber-rich whole foods. Others thrive in high-sugar processed environments. As diets change, the microbiome changes. And as the microbiome changes, signals sent to the brain may change too. Some researchers now speculate that cravings themselves may be partially influenced by gut bacteria. In other words, the organisms living inside the digestive tract may influence what humans want to eat next. At first, this idea sounds almost absurd, until scientists began observing surprising patterns. People consuming highly processed diets often develop less diverse microbiomes. Reduced microbial diversity has been associated in some studies with inflammation, metabolic dysfunction, and certain mental health challenges. Meanwhile, diets rich in whole foods, vegetables, fermented foods, and fiber appear to support broader microbial diversity. The gut may function almost like an internal ecosystem, and modern processed food may be disrupting it, which could help explain why so many people feel emotionally unstable after years of poor dietary habits. The body and brain may no longer be functioning as coordinated systems. Instead, they become biologically stressed environments struggling to regulate themselves. And perhaps nowhere is this more obvious than in modern exhaustion. Millions of Americans report feeling mentally drained almost constantly. Not sharp, not focused, not emotionally steady, just overwhelmed. The modern brain rarely rests, and processed food may intensify this condition through unstable blood sugar, inflammation, disrupted sleep, and altered gut health, all interacting simultaneously. But another mystery remains unresolved. Why do some people dramatically improve mentally after changing their diets? Why do certain individuals report clearer thinking, better mood stability, reduced anxiety, improved concentration, and higher energy after removing ultra-processed foods? Scientists still debate the mechanisms: inflammation reduction, blood sugar stability, improved sleep, microbiome changes, nutrient restoration. Perhaps all of them interact together, because the human body is not divided into isolated compartments. The brain, gut, immune system, hormones, and metabolism constantly influence one another, which means damage in one system may eventually echo through all the others. And modern processed food touches every system simultaneously. The tragedy is that many people never connect their mental state to their diet at all. They assume feeling exhausted, anxious, unfocused, or emotionally unstable is simply normal modern life, especially when everyone around them feels similarly. But what if the modern mind itself is being shaped by the modern food environment? What if depression, anxiety, irritability, and cognitive fatigue are not only emotional experiences, but biological signals? Signals from bodies overwhelmed by chronic inflammation, unstable metabolism, disrupted microbiomes, and relentless chemical overstimulation. And still, the average American diet continues drifting further away from anything resembling traditional human nutrition. More additives, more processed stimulation, more sugar, more artificial flavor intensity. Meanwhile, the brain remains trapped inside a body consuming substances it never evolved to process continuously. And beneath all of this, one final disturbing possibility begins emerging from the shadows. Human beings may believe they choose what they eat consciously, but if processed food alters dopamine signaling, if stress hormones influence cravings, if blood sugar instability drives compulsive eating, If the microbiome itself shapes desire, then perhaps eating is not always a fully rational act at all. Perhaps millions of people are not simply feeding themselves. Perhaps they are responding to biological commands generated deep inside systems they barely understand. And if the microorganisms living inside the gut truly influence appetite, mood, and craving, then the modern food crisis becomes stranger than almost anyone imagined. Because it may mean many people are not only eating with their stomachs, they may also be eating under the influence of the bacteria living inside them. Every night across America, millions of people climb into bed exhausted and remain awake. They toss from side to side, check the clock, scroll their phones, stare into darkness while their minds refuse to slow down. Then morning arrives. The alarm sounds too early, the body feels heavy, the brain feels foggy, and another day begins already depleted. For many Americans, this cycle has become so normal that they barely question it anymore. Coffee becomes survival. Energy drinks become routine. Fatigue becomes personality. Entire industries now exist to help exhausted people stay awake during the day and force themselves asleep at night. But hidden beneath the modern sleep crisis lies a question few people ask often enough. What if food itself is helping destroy sleep? Not just stress, not just screens, not just overwork, but the modern American diet itself. Because sleep is not merely rest. Sleep is one of the most biologically important repair systems in the human body. During sleep, the brain reorganizes information, hormones rebalance, cells repair damage, immune function strengthens, metabolism recalibrates. Without proper sleep, the entire body begins malfunctioning. And modern America may be one of the most sleep-deprived societies in human history. Millions sleep fewer hours than their bodies require. But perhaps even more importantly, millions sleep poorly. Interrupted sleep, shallow sleep, unstable sleep. And researchers increasingly believe modern food may play a major role in this hidden epidemic. Because blood sugar and sleep are deeply connected. Most people think of sugar mainly in terms of weight gain or diabetes, but blood sugar instability can also influence the nervous system throughout the night. When people consume large amounts of processed carbohydrates or sugar, blood glucose can spike rapidly. Insulin follows. Then hours later, blood sugar may crash. And when the body senses unstable blood sugar during sleep, it often releases stress hormones to compensate, especially cortisol and adrenaline, the exact hormones associated with alertness and survival, which means some people may wake suddenly during the night not because of external noise, but because their own biology is sounding an internal alarm. The body believes something is wrong, and in many cases, people never connect these nighttime awakenings to what they consumed earlier in the day, especially late at night, because modern eating habits have shifted dramatically. For most of history, nighttime eating was limited, but today, many Americans consume large meals close to midnight, fast food after work, sugary snacks while watching television, desserts before bed, energy drinks during late-night gaming or studying. The digestive system rarely gets true rest, and the body remains metabolically active deep into the night. Researchers now believe late-night eating may interfere with circadian rhythms, insulin regulation, and sleep quality. The human body evolved alongside natural cycles of light and darkness. Hormones rise and fall according to those rhythms. Melatonin signals sleep. Cortisol rises toward morning. Body temperature shifts predictably. But modern lifestyles increasingly disrupt every one of these systems simultaneously. Artificial light, shift work, stress, processed food, caffeine overload, especially caffeine. America runs on caffeine. Coffee in the morning, coffee in the afternoon, energy drinks at night. Many people consume stimulants continuously simply to compensate for chronic exhaustion. But caffeine has a long biological half-life, which means the nervous system may still remain chemically stimulated hours after consumption, even when the person feels tired. And modern energy drinks push this even further. Some contain massive amounts of caffeine combined with sugar, artificial flavoring, and stimulatory compounds designed to maximize alertness. The effect can feel powerful temporarily. Sharper focus, more energy, increased productivity, but eventually the nervous system pays a price. Because stimulants do not create energy, they borrow it, and over time, many people become trapped in a vicious cycle. Poor sleep leads to exhaustion. Exhaustion leads to caffeine. Caffeine disrupts sleep further. Poor sleep increases cravings for sugar and processed food. Processed food destabilizes blood sugar and hormones. Sleep worsens again. The cycle feeds itself biologically. And perhaps the most dangerous part is how quickly the body adapts to dysfunction. People forget what healthy energy even feels like. They assume constant fatigue is normal adulthood. But researchers now understand sleep deprivation affects nearly every major system in the body. Hormones become dysregulated, appetite increases, insulin sensitivity declines, inflammation rises, stress tolerance weakens, even decision-making changes. The sleep-deprived brain becomes more impulsive and more sensitive to reward, which means tired people often crave hyperpalatable foods more intensely, especially sugar and fast food. The brain seeks rapid energy and dopamine stimulation to compensate for exhaustion, which once again ties the sleep crisis directly back into the modern food system. The worse people sleep, the more processed food they crave. The more processed food they consume, the worse they sleep. And beneath this biological loop, another problem quietly expands. Cortisol, often called the stress hormone. In healthy rhythms, cortisol rises in the morning to help wake the body and gradually lowers at night. But chronic stress, processed food, unstable blood sugar, and sleep deprivation can distort this pattern. Some people become biologically wired but tired, exhausted physically, yet unable to fully relax neurologically. The nervous system remains trapped in low-level alert mode, and modern America produces extraordinary levels of chronic stress, financial pressure, information overload, social isolation, constant notifications, endless stimulation. Now combine that environment with ultra-processed food, unstable blood sugar, and chronic caffeine exposure. The result may be a society where millions of nervous systems no longer know how to fully power down. And researchers increasingly suspect sleep disruption may contribute to many of the chronic diseases already devastating the country. Obesity, type 2 diabetes, heart disease, depression, anxiety, cognitive decline. Sleep is not separate from health. It is foundational to all of it. Yet modern culture often treats sleep almost like weakness. People brag about functioning on minimal rest. Late-night productivity becomes status. Exhaustion becomes normalized. Meanwhile, corporations profit enormously from the consequences. Coffee industries, energy drinks, sleep medications, supplements, productivity systems. An entire economy now exists around chemically managing human fatigue. But the body itself may be trying desperately to communicate something. Human beings were never designed for endless stimulation, especially not when combined with modern food environments that continuously destabilize metabolism and hormones. And perhaps nowhere is this more tragic than among younger generations. Teenagers consuming energy drinks daily, children sleeping beside glowing screens, young adults surviving on processed food and caffeine while chronically sleep deprived. The nervous system develops under constant stimulation before it fully matures, and researchers are increasingly concerned about what this may mean long-term. Attention problems, mood instability, anxiety disorders, metabolic dysfunction. The body cannot repair itself properly without deep restorative sleep, and modern processed food may be silently sabotaging that repair every single day. But perhaps the most unsettling realization is this. Many people experiencing fatigue are not lacking motivation. They are biologically exhausted. Their nervous systems are overloaded. Their hormones dysregulated. Their blood sugar unstable. Their sleep fragmented. And then society blames them for lacking discipline, without recognizing the environmental conditions surrounding them. Conditions engineered around constant stimulation, convenience, productivity, and consumption. An environment where true rest becomes increasingly rare. And still, the cycle continues. More sugar for energy, more caffeine for alertness, more processed food for convenience, less sleep, more stress, more exhaustion, until eventually the body begins breaking down in visible ways. Weight gain, anxiety, depression, memory problems, chronic illness, all emerging from systems pushed far beyond their natural limits. Which leads to another disturbing possibility. The modern American health crisis may not simply be a crisis of food or stress or obesity, but a crisis of biological recovery itself. A society consuming more stimulation than the human nervous system can sustainably endure. Because when sleep collapses, nearly every protective mechanism inside the body weakens with it. The brain becomes vulnerable, the metabolism becomes unstable, the immune system becomes compromised. And perhaps that is why the consequences of sleep deprivation spread so quietly across modern civilization, not as sudden catastrophe, but as slow systemic deterioration. One exhausted night after another, because a nation that no longer truly sleeps may also be a nation slowly destroying itself from within. Few words create more fear in America than cancer. Almost everyone knows someone touched by it: a parent, a spouse, a friend, a child. The disease feels deeply personal because it appears everywhere. And for decades, many people believed cancer was mostly a matter of bad luck or genetics. Something hidden inside DNA, something unavoidable. But over time, scientists began uncovering a more unsettling possibility. Genes may load the gun, but environment often pulls the trigger. And among the environmental factors now under intense investigation, modern food has become one of the most controversial. Because the same industrial diet connected to obesity, diabetes, inflammation, and metabolic disease may also influence cancer risk in ways researchers are only beginning to fully understand. Not through one single food, not through one magical cause, but through countless biological interactions accumulating silently across years. The first major warning signs emerged around processed meat: bacon, hot dogs, sausages, deli meats, foods deeply woven into American culture, breakfast tables, baseball games, barbecues, school lunches. For generations, these products felt ordinary, but researchers noticed troubling patterns in long-term population studies. Higher consumption of certain processed meats appeared associated with increased risk of colorectal cancer. Eventually, global health organizations classified processed meat as carcinogenic based on accumulated evidence. And suddenly, millions of Americans faced an uncomfortable realization: foods considered completely normal might carry long-term biological consequences hidden beneath daily life. Part of the concern involves compounds formed during processing itself. Nitrates, nitrites, preservation chemicals. Inside the body, some of these compounds may transform into molecules capable of damaging cells under certain conditions. But the story grows even more complicated when heat enters the equation, especially extreme heat. Grilling, charring, burning. When meat cooks at very high temperatures, additional compounds can form. Heterocyclic amines, polycyclic aromatic hydrocarbons. Long chemical names most people never hear about. Yet researchers study them intensely because some appear capable of damaging DNA in laboratory conditions. And DNA damage matters because cancer often begins when cellular repair systems fail. Cells mutate, growth control breaks down, abnormal replication begins. But unlike infections or injuries, cancer usually develops slowly, sometimes over decades, which makes identifying precise causes extraordinarily difficult. No single burger causes cancer. No single barbecue creates tumors overnight. Instead, researchers examine probabilities, patterns, long-term exposure, and this uncertainty fuels enormous scientific controversy. Because nutrition science rarely produces simple answers. Human beings do not eat isolated ingredients. They live inside entire environments: stress, pollution, sleep quality, genetics, exercise, smoking, alcohol, all interacting continuously. Which means proving direct causation becomes incredibly complex. Still, one theme keeps reappearing throughout modern cancer research: chronic inflammation. The same low-grade inflammatory state linked to obesity, diabetes, and cardiovascular disease may also create conditions that help cancer develop. Inflamed tissues experience ongoing stress and repair cycles. Cells divide more frequently. Oxidative damage increases. Immune regulation changes. Over years, this environment may increase opportunities for abnormal cells to survive and multiply. And once again, modern processed food appears closely connected to inflammatory pathways, especially diets high in sugar, ultra-processed fats, and heavily engineered foods. But perhaps the strongest cancer connection involves obesity itself. Researchers now recognize obesity as a major risk factor for multiple forms of cancer, not simply because of excess weight alone, but because fat tissue is biologically active. It influences hormones, inflammation, insulin signaling, growth factors. Excess body fat can alter the body's internal chemical environment in ways that may promote abnormal cell growth. And as obesity rates exploded across America, certain obesity-related cancers also increased. Breast cancer, colon cancer, pancreatic cancer, liver cancer, endometrial cancer. The body appears to struggle under prolonged metabolic dysfunction, and modern food environments may be driving that dysfunction at massive scale. Meanwhile, another layer of concern surrounds chemicals and additives present throughout ultra-processed food systems. Artificial preservatives, packaging compounds, industrial contaminants, many exist at low levels considered safe individually, but researchers continue debating what happens when humans experience lifelong exposure to thousands of compounds simultaneously, especially beginning in childhood. The human body evolved in natural environments. Now it navigates an industrial chemical landscape unprecedented in evolutionary history. And while many additives are likely harmless within regulated limits, scientists increasingly study cumulative exposure effects, particularly endocrine disrupting compounds capable of influencing hormonal systems, because hormones themselves play critical roles in certain cancers. Again, the evidence is complicated. The debate remains ongoing, and this uncertainty creates enormous confusion for the public. One study appears alarming, another appears reassuring. Experts disagree, headlines exaggerate, fear spreads. Meanwhile, ordinary people struggle to understand what is truly dangerous and what is not. But perhaps the deeper issue is not any single ingredient. It is the overall transformation of the modern food environment itself. Never before in human history have populations consumed such enormous quantities of ultra-processed food for such long periods of time. Never before have humans been exposed to this combination of chronic inflammation, obesity, metabolic dysfunction, industrial additives, and hyper-processed calories at global scale. And cancer rates in younger adults have increasingly alarmed researchers. Some forms once associated mainly with older populations are appearing earlier. Scientists still debate why, but many suspect modern lifestyles play an important role. Diet, sedentary behavior, sleep deprivation, obesity, environmental exposure, perhaps all interacting together. And yet, despite growing concern, modern society continues moving in the opposite direction. More processed food, more convenience, more industrialization, because the system surrounding modern eating is extraordinarily powerful. Cheap calories, aggressive marketing, fast production, mass distribution. Health often loses against convenience and profitability, especially in stressed populations struggling simply to survive daily life. But another uncomfortable truth lurks beneath the cancer conversation. Many people desperately want simple certainty, one food to avoid, one cure, one perfect diet. Science rarely works that way. Cancer is not one disease. It is many diseases. Genetics matter, lifestyle matters, random mutation matters, and not everyone exposed to unhealthy food develops cancer, which makes the psychological tension even more difficult. People crave clear answers where only probabilities exist. Still, the broader pattern continues becoming harder to ignore. Modern industrial food environments appear deeply intertwined with biological conditions associated with cancer development, inflammation, obesity, hormonal disruption, metabolic stress. And perhaps this realization changes the emotional meaning of food itself, because modern processed food does not simply provide energy. It may shape the internal environment where disease either struggles to survive or quietly begins growing. And once again, the danger often remains invisible for years. No immediate symptoms, no sudden warning, just small biological stresses accumulating silently across decades until one day a diagnosis appears seemingly out of nowhere, which may explain why cancer feels so terrifying. The process often begins long before anyone realizes it, hidden deep inside tissues and cells, while ordinary life continues normally on the surface. And perhaps that is why researchers increasingly focus not only on treatment, but prevention, because by the time cancer becomes visible, the biological story may have been unfolding for years already. A story shaped partly by genetics, but also by environment, by inflammation, by metabolism, by chronic exposure, by modern lifestyles. And beneath all of this emerges one final unsettling possibility. The modern cancer crisis may not simply reflect random bad luck scattered across society. It may reflect the cumulative consequences of a civilization drifting further away from the biological conditions human bodies evolved to survive within. A civilization where processed food became normal, obesity became common, inflammation became chronic, and chemical exposure became constant, which means the true danger may not lie in one specific meal or one isolated ingredient. It may lie in the entire food environment modern society has built around itself. Because cancer may not only be a genetic problem, it may also be the biological consequence of the world humans created to feed themselves. By the time most Americans walk into a grocery store, the battle for their brain may already be over. Because modern food corporations do not simply sell products, they sell psychology. Every color, every slogan, every package design, every flavor combination, carefully engineered, not merely to attract attention, but to shape behavior. And behind the shelves of brightly packaged snacks and healthy convenience foods lies one of the most powerful industries on earth, a trillion-dollar system built around one goal above all others: keeping people eating. The modern food industry understands something ancient about the human brain. Humans crave survival signals. Sweetness signals calories, salt signals minerals, fat signals energy. For most of human history, these cravings help people stay alive. But modern corporations learned how to industrialize those instincts. And once food science merged with marketing psychology, eating itself began to change, especially in America. Because unlike traditional food cultures built around local ingredients and shared meals, industrial food systems prioritize scale, shelf life, repeat consumption, and profit, which means success depends not on nourishment, but on maximizing buying behavior. And perhaps nowhere is this more obvious than in advertising aimed at children. Bright cartoon mascots, toy giveaways, colorful cereal boxes, animated commercials. Entire generations of American children grew up surrounded by marketing specifically designed to shape emotional relationships with food before critical thinking fully develops. Breakfast cereals became a perfect example. At first glance, many cereals appear healthy. Words like whole grain, fortified, and vitamin-enriched create an image of nutrition and energy. The boxes often feature smiling athletes, healthy families, or cheerful cartoon characters. But hidden beneath the marketing, many breakfast cereals contain astonishing amounts of sugar. Some approach dessert-level sweetness while still being sold as part of a healthy morning routine. And because children consume them early in life, sweetness itself becomes normalized at breakfast. The brain learns to expect dopamine stimulation immediately after waking, which may influence cravings and appetite throughout the day. But cereals are only one part of a much larger system. Protein bars, low-fat yogurt, granola snacks, healthy smoothies. Modern food marketing increasingly sells products through health identity rather than obvious indulgence. And this creates one of the most confusing aspects of modern nutrition. Some foods marketed as healthy may still be highly processed, heavily sweetened, and metabolically disruptive, especially products labeled low-fat. For decades, fat became the villain of American nutrition culture. Consumers feared butter, eggs, and traditional fats. Food corporations responded by removing fat from countless products. But there was a problem. Fat carries flavor. Without it, food tasted bland. So manufacturers compensated with something else: sugar. And suddenly supermarket shelves filled with low-fat products containing enormous amounts of hidden sweeteners and additives designed to maintain palatability. People believed they were making healthier choices, while often consuming even more processed carbohydrates and sugar than before. The result was a nutritional paradox. Foods advertised as healthy sometimes intensified the exact metabolic problems they claimed to solve, and most consumers never realized it. Because marketing psychology works best when it feels trustworthy. Words like natural, light, organic, multigrain, and heart healthy create emotional reassurance, even when the underlying product remains heavily processed. The packaging becomes part of the illusion. Green colors suggest freshness. Pictures of oats imply wholesomeness. Protein claims imply fitness. Meanwhile, the ingredient list may still contain industrial oils, syrups, additives, stabilizers, and artificial flavor compounds. And once again, food engineering plays a central role. Modern food scientists study texture, mouthfeel, aroma, crunch, melting behavior, and flavor release with astonishing precision. The goal is not merely creating food that tastes good. The goal is creating food that consumers continue buying repeatedly, which often means maximizing craving while minimizing fullness. Some processed foods dissolve rapidly in the mouth, creating what researchers call vanishing caloric density. The brain receives intense flavor stimulation, but weak satiety signals. The result can feel strangely unsatisfying. People keep eating while never feeling fully nourished. And because many ultra-processed foods are inexpensive to manufacture, corporations generate enormous profits from ingredients derived largely from subsidized commodity crops like corn and soy. Cheap inputs, mass production, powerful marketing, an economic machine perfectly optimized for scale. Meanwhile, public health struggles to keep pace because the food environment surrounding Americans has become extraordinarily persuasive, especially for exhausted people. A parent working multiple jobs does not have endless time to decode ingredient labels. A teenager exposed to nonstop advertising does not easily distinguish science from marketing. And modern consumers face thousands of food decisions every year inside environments specifically designed to influence impulse behavior. At eye level on shelves, near checkout lines, inside apps, on streaming platforms, across social media. Food marketing now follows people everywhere, and increasingly, algorithms personalize it. Advertisements tailored to emotional triggers, habits, and preferences. The system learns what people crave and feeds those cravings back continuously, which raises another uncomfortable question. At what point does consumer choice stop being entirely free? Especially when billions of dollars are spent studying how to influence behavior psychologically. Because food corporations employ neuroscientists, behavioral researchers, data analysts, and marketing experts whose entire purpose is understanding human decision-making, not necessarily to nourish people, but to increase engagement and repeat purchasing. And perhaps the most unsettling part is that many executives within the industry likely consume very different diets personally than the products their corporations aggressively market to the public. Organic foods, fresh ingredients, whole food diets. While highly processed products dominate lower-income communities and convenience-driven environments, the health gap widens. And once again, children remain especially vulnerable. A child cannot meaningfully evaluate advertising manipulation. They respond emotionally. Fun characters, exciting colors, sweet flavors. The brain forms associations long before nutritional awareness develops, which means many lifelong eating patterns may begin through corporate conditioning during childhood itself. And over time, these patterns become culturally embedded. Birthday cakes, sugary breakfasts, fast food rewards, processed snacks after school. Entire emotional memories become linked to industrial food products. The food industry does not simply sell calories, it sells identity, nostalgia, comfort, convenience, and belonging. And perhaps that is why changing eating behavior feels so emotionally difficult for many people, because they are not only changing nutrition, they are changing rituals, memories, habits, and psychological coping systems built across decades. Meanwhile, the scientific confusion surrounding nutrition continues, helping the industry enormously. One week, headlines demonize fat. The next week, they blame carbs, then sugar, then seed oils. Consumers become overwhelmed, exhausted, and in confusion, many simply return to convenience, especially when unhealthy products continue presenting themselves as healthy alternatives. Protein bars marketed as fitness food despite high sugar content. Breakfast cereals advertised as heart-healthy despite ultra-processing. Low-fat snacks loaded with artificial ingredients. The packaging says wellness. The metabolism experiences something very different. And beneath all of this, another disturbing realization slowly emerges. Modern food corporations may not actually need consumers to become healthy. They only need them to keep consuming. The system remains profitable whether people lose weight or gain it, whether they feel energized or exhausted, whether they recover or become chronically ill, as long as consumption continues, which creates a terrifying contradiction at the heart of the modern food economy. The same system selling solutions often profits from the problem itself. Diet products, energy drinks, protein snacks, weight loss programs. Entire industries growing from the biological damage caused partly by the modern food environment. And perhaps that is why the line between healthy food and junk food has become so dangerously blurred. Because the modern consumer increasingly navigates a marketplace where appearance matters more than biological reality, where packaging can disguise ultra-processing, where marketing can disguise addiction, and where foods presented as wellness products may quietly contribute to the very diseases people are trying to avoid. Which leads to one final unsettling possibility. The greatest danger of the modern food industry may not be obviously unhealthy products. It may be the products carefully engineered to appear healthy while slowly damaging the body underneath the branding, because some of the foods most aggressively marketed as good for human health may actually be making people sicker over time. At some point, millions of Americans arrive at the same frustrating realization. They know unhealthy food is hurting them. They know processed food may contribute to obesity, diabetes, inflammation, exhaustion, and chronic disease. And yet changing feels unbelievably difficult. Not because they do not care, not because they lack intelligence, but because healthy living inside the modern American system often feels exhausting, expensive, and strangely unnatural, which raises one of the most uncomfortable questions in the entire health crisis. What if the problem is larger than personal responsibility? What if the environment itself is pushing people towards sickness? At first glance, healthy eating sounds simple. Eat fresh food, cook at home, avoid ultra-processed products. But reality inside modern America looks very different. Fresh produce spoils quickly. Whole foods require preparation. Cooking takes time. Healthy meals often cost more upfront. Meanwhile, unhealthy food is everywhere. Cheap, fast, convenient, aggressively marketed. A dollar menu meal can feel more accessible than a basket of fresh groceries, especially for families already struggling financially. And this is where the modern food crisis begins revealing its deeper economic structure. Because unhealthy food is not only biologically addictive, it is economically efficient. Highly processed foods are often built from subsidized commodity crops like corn, soy, and wheat. Mass production lowers costs dramatically. Long shelf life reduces waste. Artificial flavoring increases palatability. The result is a system where calorie-dense processed food becomes cheaper and more available than fresh nutrition. And for millions of Americans living paycheck to paycheck, price matters more than nutritional theory. A parent working multiple jobs may not have the luxury of spending hours preparing balanced meals. Convenience becomes survival, which means many people are not choosing between healthy food and unhealthy food. They are choosing between affordable food and unaffordable food. And in many parts of America, even access itself becomes a problem. Entire communities exist where grocery stores selling fresh produce are scarce or far away. These areas are often called food deserts. Neighborhoods dominated by convenience stores, gas stations, liquor stores, and fast food restaurants. Fresh vegetables become rare. Whole foods become expensive. Processed snacks become normal daily nutrition. And once again, the health crisis reveals patterns tied closely to inequality. Lower-income communities often experience higher rates of obesity, diabetes, cardiovascular disease, and shorter life expectancy. Not because people there value health less, but because the surrounding environment makes healthy behavior significantly harder. The system itself shapes biological outcomes. Meanwhile, modern work culture intensifies everything. Long commutes, multiple jobs, exhaustion, shift work. Many Americans return home mentally and physically depleted. The nervous system craves relief, and processed food delivers immediate comfort with minimal effort. Drive-through meals, frozen dinners, delivery apps. Fast calories for tired people, which creates another tragic irony. The more stressful life becomes, the harder healthy living often feels, because stress changes eating behavior directly. Under chronic stress, cortisol rises. The body seeks fast energy and dopamine stimulation. Sugary foods become more appealing. Salty foods feel comforting. Hyperpalatable meals temporarily reduce emotional tension. Stress eating is not simply emotional weakness. It is biology responding to overload. And modern America overloads people constantly. Financial anxiety, healthcare costs, debt, job insecurity, information overload. The nervous system rarely fully relaxes, which means millions of people spend years trapped in chronic stress states while surrounded by addictive processed food environments. The result is predictable. The body begins deteriorating slowly under continuous pressure. And yet public conversations about health often ignore these structural realities. Society praises discipline and self-control, but discipline becomes much harder inside environments engineered against human biology. Imagine placing someone inside a casino 24 hours a day and then blaming them entirely for gambling addiction. Modern food environments may function similarly. Bright packaging, endless advertisements, cheap hyperpalatable calories available everywhere. The system continuously stimulates craving, especially among exhausted people with limited time and resources. And perhaps nowhere is this contradiction more visible than in the true cost of healthy living. Because eating healthy often requires more than food itself. It requires time, energy, education, transportation, kitchen access, mental bandwidth, all resources unevenly distributed across society. A wealthy person with flexible work hours, nearby organic markets, personal trainers, and healthcare access experiences health choices very differently from someone working exhausting shifts while raising children under financial stress. The biology may be human, but the environment surrounding that biology differs enormously, and researchers increasingly recognize that chronic disease follows these patterns closely. Communities facing higher stress, lower income, food insecurity, poor sleep, pollution exposure, and limited health care often experience worse long-term health outcomes. The body absorbs social conditions biologically. Stress hormones rise, inflammation increases, sleep quality declines, diet quality deteriorates. Eventually, disease emerges, which means obesity, diabetes, and cardiovascular illness may not simply reflect isolated personal failures. They may also reflect environmental pressure operating continuously across entire populations. And still, the modern food system continues rewarding convenience over nourishment. Ultra-processed food remains extraordinarily profitable. Fresh food remains comparatively fragile and expensive. Fast food chains expand faster than community health programs. Advertising budgets dwarf nutritional education. The incentives remain deeply misaligned. Because from a purely economic perspective, processed food solves many industrial problems efficiently. Long shelf life, cheap transport, mass scalability, high consumer demand. The system was optimized for growth and profitability, not necessarily long-term biological health. And perhaps this explains why modern eating increasingly feels disconnected from nature itself. Humans evolved around seasonal food, physical movement, social meals, and natural scarcity. Modern life offers constant artificial abundance instead. Calories without nourishment, convenience without balance, stimulation without recovery. The body struggles to adapt. Meanwhile, individuals blame themselves for failing inside environments almost perfectly designed to undermine metabolic stability. And the psychological consequences become devastating. People trapped in cycles of shame, repeated dieting, weight regain, exhaustion, self-blame, all while living inside systems continuously pushing them toward unhealthy behavior. The tragedy is not simply that unhealthy food exists. The tragedy is that for many Americans, unhealthy food became the easiest option available, sometimes the cheapest, sometimes the fastest, sometimes the only realistic choice after exhausting days. And beneath all of this lies another uncomfortable truth. Modern society often treats health like a personal moral achievement rather than a structural condition. People who succeed are praised as disciplined. People who struggle are blamed as irresponsible. But biology does not operate independently from environment. The nervous system responds to stress. The metabolism responds to food availability. The brain responds to marketing. The body responds to exhaustion. And modern systems shape all of those conditions continuously, which leads to a possibility many people resist because it feels too large to confront. Maybe the modern health crisis was never only about individual choices. Maybe millions of people are behaving exactly as human biology predictably behaves inside the environment surrounding them. Environments flooded with cheap processed calories, constant stress, limited time, aggressive marketing, and endless stimulation. An entire civilization engineered around convenience while slowly eroding the biological foundations of human health. And perhaps that is why healthy living now feels strangely difficult in a world overflowing with food. Because this may not simply be personal failure at all. It may be the consequence of a system built in a way that quietly makes sickness easier than health. After everything modern food appears to be doing to the human body, the obvious question begins to emerge. Is the damage permanent? Because by this point, the picture seems almost hopeless. Obesity rising, diabetes spreading, sleep collapsing, mental health deteriorating, inflammation becoming chronic. Millions of Americans trapped inside biological systems that feel exhausted, overstimulated, and slowly breaking down. And yet, hidden beneath all the damage, researchers continue discovering something remarkable about the human body. It wants to heal. Even after years of abuse, even after decades of poor diet, stress, sleep deprivation, and metabolic dysfunction, the body often retains an extraordinary ability to recover once conditions begin changing. Not instantly, not magically, but biologically. Because the human organism evolved for survival, repair mechanisms already exist inside it. The problem is that modern environments rarely allow those mechanisms to function properly. And perhaps this is the most important realization of all. Health may not always require adding something new. Sometimes, recovery begins simply by removing what is harming the body continuously, especially ultra-processed food. Many people who reduce heavily processed foods report surprisingly rapid changes: more stable energy, improved sleep, reduced cravings, clearer thinking, less bloating, better mood stability. In some cases, these changes begin within days or weeks. Not because the body suddenly becomes superhuman, but because certain stressors finally begin decreasing. Blood sugar stabilizes, inflammation lowers, hormones rebalance, the nervous system calms. And once again, one of the deepest mysteries of modern health reappears. Perhaps many symptoms people consider normal aging are actually signs of chronic metabolic stress. Because when the body receives more stable nutrition, something extraordinary often happens. The system begins regulating itself more effectively. Whole foods appear especially important in this process. Foods closer to their natural state: vegetables, fruits, eggs, fish, beans, nuts, unprocessed meats, fiber-rich foods, not perfect foods, not trendy miracle diets, just foods the human body recognizes more easily. Whole foods digest differently than ultra-processed products. They contain fiber, micronutrients, natural textures, slower energy release. The brain receives more accurate satiety signals. Blood sugar fluctuations become less extreme. The body experiences fewer metabolic shocks throughout the day. And over time, many people discover something surprising. Their cravings begin changing because taste itself can adapt. After reducing extreme sweetness and hyperpalatable stimulation, natural foods often begin tasting richer again. Fruit tastes sweeter. Water feels refreshing. Simple meals feel satisfying. It is almost as if the nervous system slowly recalibrates after years of sensory overload. But food alone is rarely the entire solution. Movement matters too. Not necessarily extreme fitness culture, not punishment. Movement, walking, strength training, stretching, physical activity consistent with how human bodies evolved to function. Exercise influences nearly every system involved in modern chronic disease. Insulin sensitivity improves, inflammation decreases, mood stabilizes, sleep quality rises, circulation strengthens, and perhaps most importantly, movement reminds the body that it is still alive in a physical world rather than trapped permanently in artificial environments. The human organism was built for motion. Modern life often disconnects people from that biological reality. Sleep recovery may be equally powerful. Many people underestimate how dramatically proper sleep affects healing. During deep restorative sleep, the body repairs tissue, regulates hormones, processes memories, and resets metabolic systems. Even appetite changes with better sleep. Cravings decrease, impulse control improves, energy stabilizes. The nervous system finally exits constant survival mode. And then there is the gut, the hidden ecosystem modern science is only beginning to understand fully. Researchers now believe the microbiome can change surprisingly quickly in response to dietary shifts. Fiber-rich whole foods appear to support beneficial microbial diversity. Fermented foods may help certain bacterial populations thrive. Meanwhile, reducing ultra-processed food can alter the gut environment itself. And as the gut changes, people often report improvements not only in digestion, but in mood, mental clarity, and energy. The gut-brain connection begins feeling less theoretical and more deeply personal. Perhaps the most dramatic evidence of human recovery appears in metabolic disease itself. For years, many people believed type 2 diabetes inevitably worsened forever. But emerging research suggests something more hopeful. In some individuals, especially earlier in the disease process, major lifestyle changes can dramatically improve insulin sensitivity, weight loss, whole food diets, exercise, sleep improvement. In certain cases, blood sugar levels return to near normal ranges. Some people reduce or even eliminate medications under medical supervision. The body begins responding to insulin more efficiently again. This does not mean every case can be fully reversed. Human biology remains complex. damage can become permanent over time. But the existence of recovery at all changes the entire emotional meaning of the modern health crisis, because it suggests the body is not merely fragile, it is adaptive. Researchers studying obesity have also observed remarkable transformations in some individuals who fundamentally change their food environments and habits, not through crash dieting, not through starvation, but through sustained metabolic recovery. Inflammation decreases, hormones rebalance, energy returns. And perhaps most importantly, people often describe something emotional happening alongside the physical healing. For the first time in years, their bodies stop feeling like enemies. The constant hunger softens, the brain fog lifts, the exhaustion decreases. The system finally begins functioning the way it was meant to. But recovery is rarely linear. Modern environments remain difficult. Processed food still surrounds people everywhere. Stress still exists. Advertising still manipulates attention. Convenience still competes against health. And many individuals struggle repeatedly before finding sustainable changes. Which is why shame may be one of the greatest obstacles to healing, because people trapped in cycles of guilt often feel powerless. But understanding biology changes the conversation. The goal stops becoming punishment and becomes restoration, not perfection, recovery. Because the body is not demanding impossible purity. It is asking for relief from constant assault, less hyperprocessing, more stability, more sleep, more movement, more real nourishment. And perhaps this is why even small changes sometimes create surprisingly large effects. The human body may have been waiting for the opportunity to heal all along. Meanwhile, another fascinating trend has emerged across America: growing movements centered around longevity, metabolic health, whole foods, gut health, and anti-processed food lifestyles. People increasingly sense something is deeply wrong with the modern food environment, and many are trying to reclaim older biological rhythms. Cooking more, walking more, sleeping better, reducing processed food, not as trends alone, but as acts of survival. Because beneath all the scientific debate, one truth keeps becoming harder to ignore. The human body appears remarkably resilient when it is no longer overwhelmed continuously. Inflammation can decrease, energy can return, insulin sensitivity can improve, the microbiome can adapt, the brain can stabilize, not always completely, not perfectly, but far more than many people once believed possible. And perhaps that realization changes everything. Because if modern disease partly emerges from chronic environmental overload, then healing may begin the moment that overload starts decreasing. Which means the future of human health may not depend entirely on futuristic medicine, expensive technology, or miracle drugs. It may also depend on whether people can reconnect with the biological conditions their bodies were designed to thrive within. Real food, movement, sleep, recovery, rhythm, simple things modern civilization slowly pushed aside. And perhaps the most hopeful possibility, hidden beneath this entire crisis, is that the human organism remains far stronger than it appears, even after years of damage, even after decades of metabolic stress. The body may still remember how to heal itself if people finally stop poisoning it every single day. America now stands at a strange crossroads. On one side lies the world that created the modern health crisis: ultra-processed food, chronic stress, sleep deprivation, sedentary lifestyles, endless stimulation, a system moving faster every year. But on the other side, something unexpected is beginning to happen. People are waking up. Not all at once, not everywhere. But slowly, millions of Americans are beginning to question the modern relationship between food, health, technology, and the human body itself. For decades, many people accepted chronic illness almost as an unavoidable part of aging. Weight gain felt inevitable. Fatigue felt normal. Medication became routine. But a growing number of individuals are now asking a different question. What if much of modern sickness is not inevitable at all? What if the human body has simply been trapped inside an environment it was never designed to survive? And this question is beginning to reshape the future of health in America. One of the fastest growing movements involves something known as biohacking, a term that sounds futuristic, almost scientific fiction. But at its core, biohacking reflects a very old human desire: understanding how the body works and learning how to optimize it. Some people track sleep quality obsessively. Others monitor blood glucose in real time. Some experiment with fasting, cold exposure, supplements, or personalized nutrition. The movement varies from highly scientific to deeply controversial. But beneath all the trends lies one shared realization. Modern people no longer trust the default health system to protect them automatically. They are beginning to study their own biology directly. At the same time, organic food markets continue expanding across America. Farmers markets, whole food movements, chemical-free agriculture, grass-fed meats, regenerative farming. For many consumers, organic food represents more than nutrition. It represents escape from industrial processing, escape from artificial additives, escape from a food system increasingly viewed with suspicion. Even people who disagree about nutrition often share the same emotional instinct. They want food that feels real again, less engineered, less manipulated, closer to nature. Meanwhile, another movement quietly grows larger every year: longevity culture. Once associated mainly with wealthy elites and Silicon Valley entrepreneurs, longevity has entered mainstream conversation. People are no longer asking only how to live longer. They are asking how to remain healthy longer, how to preserve energy, cognitive function, metabolic stability, physical independence. And perhaps this shift reveals something profound about the modern era. For the first time in history, millions of people are realizing that lifespan and health span are not the same thing. A person can survive for decades while still feeling biologically unwell. The future people increasingly want is not merely longer life, it is better life. And standing directly in the center of this cultural shift is growing resistance to ultra-processed food itself. The anti-processed food movement continues gaining momentum. Documentaries, podcasts, independent researchers, nutrition scientists. More people now recognize the phrase ultra-processed food than ever before, and public trust in large food corporations appears increasingly fragile. Consumers are reading ingredient labels more carefully, questioning additives, reducing sugar, cooking more meals at home. Even major corporations have begun responding by marketing products as clean, natural, or minimally processed, because they sense the cultural mood changing. But perhaps the most fascinating transformation involves technology itself. The same technological world that helped create modern health problems may also become part of the solution. Artificial intelligence is already beginning to reshape healthcare. Wearable devices now track sleep, heart rate, stress patterns, glucose levels, and physical activity continuously. Smartwatches monitor recovery. Apps analyze food intake. Algorithms detect health trends before symptoms fully appear. For the first time in human history, millions of people can observe their own biology in real time. The body is becoming measurable. And as AI systems improve, personalized health guidance may become dramatically more sophisticated. Imagine technology capable of identifying early metabolic dysfunction years before disease appears. Imagine nutrition recommendations tailored to individual biology, sleep patterns, microbiome profiles, and genetic tendencies. The future of medicine may become increasingly preventative rather than reactive, not waiting for disease, but detecting imbalance early. And yet, even as technology advances, another truth becomes impossible to ignore. No algorithm can fully solve a broken environment. If processed food remains cheaper than healthy food, if stress continues overwhelming nervous systems, if millions remain sleep deprived and economically exhausted, then wearable technology alone cannot reverse the crisis, because the problem is not only medical, it is cultural, economic, psychological, environmental. America did not arrive at this health crisis through one bad decision. It emerged slowly through decades of industrial food expansion, changing lifestyles, corporate incentives, chronic stress, and biological overload, which means reversing the crisis may require more than individual awareness. It may require rethinking the entire relationship between modern civilization and the human body. And perhaps that is the central question hanging over the future of American health. Can a society built around convenience, speed, stimulation, and consumption truly create conditions for biological well-being? Or are those goals fundamentally in conflict? Because modern systems often reward the exact behaviors that damage long-term health: overwork, sleep deprivation, constant productivity, fast convenience food, endless digital engagement. The human nervous system becomes trapped inside environments of continuous stimulation while ancient biology struggles to keep pace. And still, there are reasons for hope. For all the damage modern systems have created, awareness is spreading faster than ever before. Millions of people now understand concepts that were almost invisible only decades ago: insulin resistance, gut health, ultra-processed food, sleep recovery, inflammation. The conversation itself is changing. Parents question children's food more carefully. Schools debate nutrition policies. Doctors increasingly discuss lifestyle interventions alongside medication. The cultural momentum may still be slow, but it exists. And perhaps the most hopeful sign of all is this: the human body continues responding positively when conditions improve. Again and again, people recover energy, improve metabolic health, reverse symptoms, lose weight, restore sleep, not because the body is weak, but because it was designed for survival all along. The tragedy may never have been that human biology failed. The tragedy may be that modern civilization drifted so far away from the conditions human biology requires, and now humanity faces a decision unlike any previous generation: whether to continue surrendering health to systems optimized for convenience and consumption, or consciously reclaim control over the biological foundations of human life itself. Because beneath all the scientific debates, political arguments, and nutritional controversies, this crisis may ultimately be about something much deeper: the relationship between human beings and their own bodies. Whether people continue treating the body as a machine to stimulate endlessly, or begin treating it once again as a living system requiring balance, recovery, nourishment, and care. And perhaps that is why the future of health feels so important. Because this is no longer only a conversation about obesity, diabetes, or processed food. It is a conversation about what kind of civilization humanity is becoming: a civilization disconnected from biology, or one finally learning how to live with it again. Maybe the greatest battle of the 21st century will not be fought with weapons or artificial intelligence alone. Maybe it will be fought inside kitchens, grocery stores, schools, hospitals, and human nervous systems. A battle over attention, over addiction, over food, over stress, over sleep. A battle to reclaim the human body itself. And if this story made you look differently at the foods surrounding modern life, take a moment to reflect on your own experience. What changed your health the most? What foods helped you better or worse? What habits transformed your energy, sleep, or weight? Share your thoughts in the comments below. And if you enjoyed this journey into the hidden science of modern food and health, make sure to like this video, subscribe to the channel, and join us for future deep explorations into the forces shaping the human body and mind in the modern world.